Have you ever had your entire world crumble in a single moment? Mine did when I realized the baby in my arms wasn't mine. You know, I always thought I had life figured out. I came from a pretty broken home. My parents divorced when I was 10, and it was messy. So, I promised myself that when I got married, I'd do everything I could to build the kind of family I never had. Stable, loving, and honest. And for a while, I thought I had it all. I met Sarah in college. She wasn't just beautiful, she was the kind of person who lit up a room. She was funny, smart, and had this way of making you feel like you were the most important person in the world when she talked to you. I was hooked from the moment we met. We started dating our junior year, and everything just clicked. After graduation, we got jobs in the same city, moved in together, and eventually got married 5 years ago. She was my best friend, my partner, in crime, and the person I genuinely thought I'd spend the rest of my life with. Marriage wasn't perfect, of course. We had our ups and downs, arguments about stupid things like forgetting to take out the trash or spending too much time on our phones. But at the end of the day, we always made up, and I really believed we were solid. A couple of years into our marriage, Sarah brought up the idea of starting a family. I was over the moon. I'd always wanted kids, and I couldn't wait to be a dad. I imagined teaching my kid how to ride a bike, helping with homework, and just being there for all the little moments that make a family feel complete. When Sarah told me she was pregnant, I felt like my whole world shifted in the best way possible. I remember hugging her so tightly and crying tears of joy. We celebrated with a fancy dinner, called our parents, and started planning for the baby's arrival. I spent hours putting together the crib, picking out baby clothes, and reading every parenting book I could get my hands on. At that point, I thought I had everything I'd ever wanted: a great marriage, a baby on the way, and a future that felt bright and full of possibility. But looking back now, I can see the cracks that I ignored, the little signs that something wasn't quite right. I didn't know it then, but my perfect world was about to come crashing down in a way I never saw coming. When Sarah told me she was pregnant, it felt like my world lit up. I was so excited to be a dad that I couldn't stop smiling for weeks. I even started carrying around the ultrasound photo in my wallet like some kind of badge of honor. Sarah seemed happy too, but looking back, there were these little moments that didn't feel quite right. During the pregnancy, Sarah started acting different. At first, I chalked it up to hormones, mood swings, cravings, the usual stuff you hear about. But sometimes she seemed distant, like she was in her own world. She'd get lost in thought, and when I'd ask her what was wrong, she'd just brush it off with a smile and say, "Oh, nothing. Just tired." There were other things too. She'd occasionally leave the room when her phone rang, and her texts were more guarded than usual. I figured she was just overwhelmed with everything going on, so I didn't push. Besides, I was too busy diving headfirst into prepping for the baby, building the nursery, setting up doctor's appointments, and even joining a dad-to-be group online. I was all in. The day our daughter was born was one of the happiest days of my life, or so I thought at the time. I remember holding her for the first time and feeling this overwhelming rush of love. She was perfect, this tiny little person who I thought would be the center of our lives. But then something weird happened. While we were in the hospital, I noticed some of the nurses exchanging glances when they looked at the baby. It wasn't obvious, just little sideways looks like they were holding back something. One of them even said, "She's got a unique look to her," and then quickly changed the subject. I didn't think much of it at the time. I mean, who overanalyzes compliments from strangers? As the weeks went by, though, I started to notice it too. The baby didn't look much like me. She had dark hair and these striking blue eyes that didn't run in my family, or Sarah's for that matter. At first, I thought maybe she'd grow into her features or that I was being paranoid, but then people started commenting. My mom, always blunt, said, "She doesn't look anything like you. Are you sure she's not a throwback to someone on Sarah's side?" Friends joked about it too, laughing about how she looked like the milkman's kid. It was all in, good fun, but every comment chipped away at the confidence I had in this little family we were building. Sarah, on the other hand, got defensive every time I brought it up. She'd laugh it off and say, "Babies change so much in the first year, stop being ridiculous." But the way she avoided eye contact when she said it, it stuck with me. And then there were the late-night feedings. I'd wake up to hear Sarah whispering to the baby, almost like she was confessing something. I couldn't make out what she was saying, but the tone felt off, like she was carrying a weight she didn't want me to see. That's when the doubts really started to creep in. I tried to ignore them, to focus on being a good husband and father, but deep down, something wasn't adding up, and I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story than Sarah was letting on. It started with a simple offhand comment from my mom. She came over to visit when the baby was about 6 weeks old. We were sitting in the living room, passing the baby back and forth, when she suddenly said, "You know, she doesn't look much like you." I froze for a second, but then I laughed it off. "Babies change a lot, Mom," I said, trying to sound casual. But she gave me this look, the kind only a mom can give, like she knew something I didn't. "I'm just saying," she added, "she looks different." That comment stuck with me. I couldn't unsee it after that. Every time I looked at the baby, I started noticing the little things, her dark hair, her bright blue eyes. Neither of us had blue eyes, and I couldn't think of anyone in Sarah's family who did either. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that genetics were weird and unpredictable. But once the doubt crept in, it started spreading like wildfire. Then came the jokes from friends. At a barbecue, one of my buddies laughed and said, "Wow, she doesn't look anything like you, man. Must take after her mom." Everyone laughed, and I forced a smile, but inside I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Was everyone else seeing something I wasn't? I started paying more attention to Sarah, and that's when things got even. Stranger? She was always glued to her phone, but now she seemed extra careful to keep it out of my sight. If I walked into the room, she'd lock the screen or flip it over. And any time I brought up the baby's features, even as a joke, she'd, "Snap! Why are you so obsessed with this? She's a baby. Babies don't have to look exactly like their parents, you know." Her defensiveness only made my suspicions worse. Why was she so quick to shut down the conversation? What was she hiding? One night, while I was feeding the baby, I caught Sarah watching me from across the room. She had this strange expression, like she was sad, maybe even guilty. When I asked her what was wrong, she just shook her head and said, "Nothing. I'm just tired." But it wasn't nothing. It couldn't be. The more I thought about it, the more I realized there were too many little things adding up. I didn't have proof, but for the first time I started to wonder, what if this baby isn't mine? It all came to a head one night when I couldn't hold back my suspicions anymore. For weeks, I'd been walking around with this growing weight in my chest, constantly questioning everything I thought I knew about Sarah, about our family, about my daughter. It started innocently enough. Sarah had gone to bed early, and I was up late rocking the baby to sleep. As I stared at her tiny face, I couldn't help but notice, again, how little she resembled me. I tried to shake the thought, telling myself I was being paranoid. But then, as I laid her down in the crib, my eyes landed on Sarah's phone sitting on the nightstand. It was unlocked. That never happened. I don't know what came over me, but in that moment, I felt like I had to know the truth. My hands were shaking as I picked it up. I didn't even know what I was looking for, but I started scrolling through her messages. Most of it was normal. Texts with her mom, a group chat with her friends. And then I found it. A conversation. With someone named M. At first I thought it was nothing, just some random friend I didn't know about. But as I scrolled up, my stomach dropped. The messages weren't innocent. They were flirty, full of inside jokes and pet names I'd never heard her use before. My chest tightened as I read, "Do you think she looks like me?" "She has your eyes," M had replied. "But don't worry, he doesn't suspect anything, right?" My blood ran cold. I had to reread it 3 times to make sure I wasn't imagining things. "She has your eyes. The baby." They were talking about my daughter. I kept scrolling, and the texts got worse. They'd been seeing each other for years, apparently even before. We got married. The baby wasn't just a random mistake. She was the result of a full-blown affair. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the screen. My mind was racing, a mix of anger, betrayal, and sheer disbelief. How could she do this to me? To us? That's when I heard her voice behind me. "What are you doing?" I turned around, and there she was, standing in the doorway, her face pale. She saw the phone in my hand and froze. For a second, neither of us said anything. The silence was deafening. Finally, I managed to choke out, "Is it true? Is she his?" Sarah didn't answer. She just looked down, tears welling up in her eyes. That was all the confirmation I needed. "Say something," I shouted, my voice shaking. "Tell me this isn't real." But instead of denying it, she broke down sobbing. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't know how to tell you. I thought I could fix it. I thought we could just move on." "Move on," I repeated, incredulous. "You lied to me. You let me believe she was my daughter. You let me love her." "I didn't want to lose you," she cried. "I didn't mean for this to happen. It got out of hand." I stood there, my whole world crumbling around me. The woman I loved, the life we'd built, the child I'd devoted myself to, it was all a lie. And the worst part? I didn't know what to do next. That night I didn't sleep. I couldn't even look at Sarah. All I could think about was the baby, this innocent little girl who didn't ask for any of this. She was caught in the middle of a nightmare I never saw coming. The days that followed were a blur of anger, heartbreak, and impossible decisions. I couldn't even look at Sarah without feeling betrayed. Every time I thought about the texts, the lies, and the fact that she let me believe the baby was mine, I felt like I was suffocating. At first, I didn't know what to do. Do I leave? Do I stay for the baby? I loved that little girl more than anything, but now I couldn't shake the thought that she wasn't mine. Sarah begged me to talk, to work things out. But how could I even begin to process what she'd done? We tried to have a conversation a few days later, but it quickly turned into a shouting match. "Why didn't you tell me?" I demanded. "You knew this wasn't my child, and you let me believe she was." "I was scared," Sarah shouted back, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't want to lose you. I thought if you didn't know, it wouldn't matter." "Wouldn't matter," I exploded. "How could you think this wouldn't matter? You destroyed everything we had. Everything." She kept apologizing, but it felt hollow. How do you forgive someone for something like this? For building a life on lies? The tension between us was unbearable, and I knew I couldn't stay under the same roof. I packed a bag and moved into a friend's spare room, needing space to think. But being away didn't make it easier. I missed the baby. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her little face, heard her laugh, remembered all the moments we'd shared. A week later, I decided I needed answers. I ordered a DNA test. Sarah begged me not to, saying it would only make things worse, but I didn't care. I needed the truth. When the results came in, they confirmed what I already knew deep down. I wasn't her biological father. Reading those words broke me. It was like losing her all over again. She wasn't mine, but I couldn't just turn off the love I felt for her. She might not have my DNA, but I'd been there for every moment. Her first smile, her first laugh, the nights I stayed up rocking her to sleep. None of that felt any less real. When I told Sarah I wanted a divorce, she broke down completely. "What about the baby?" she cried. "She needs you. You're her dad in every way that matters." I didn't know how to respond. Was I still her dad? Did I even have a right to be in her life? The questions haunted me, and no matter how I tried to answer them, I felt like I was failing someone. Myself, the baby, or even Sarah. In the end, I decided to stay involved in the baby's life, at least for now. She didn't ask for any of this, and she deserved to be loved. But my relationship with Sarah? That was beyond repair. Too much had been broken, and I didn't see a way back. The fallout was messy and painful, and even now, I'm not sure if I made the right choices. All I know is that I'm trying to move forward, one step at a time. And maybe, just maybe one day, I'll be able to find some kind of peace in all of this chaos. The final confrontation came out of nowhere, and it hit me harder than I ever could have prepared for. A few weeks after I moved out, I'd been doing my best to hold on to some semblance of normalcy. I'd been seeing the baby regularly, taking her to the park, trying to stay involved in her life. But then, Sarah called me one afternoon, her voice shaking. "I need to talk to you," she said. Something in her tone made my stomach twist. I knew this wasn't just another apology or attempt to fix things. This was different. I agreed to meet at a small cafe, and when I saw her sitting there, her face was pale, her hands trembling. The moment she looked up at me, I knew this wasn't just about us. There was something bigger going on, something I wasn't prepared for. "She's not safe," Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with fear. I felt my heart drop into my stomach. "What do you mean?" "The man. He's threatening to take her away from me," Sarah said, her voice cracking. "He says if I don't leave you, if I don't cut ties with you completely, he'll expose everything. He's blackmailing me." My head was spinning. It wasn't just the affair anymore. It was the fact that M, the man who had destroyed our family, was now using my daughter as leverage. He was trying to tear us apart for good. "I don't know what to do, please," Sarah pleaded. "I can't lose her. I can't lose everything." I wanted to scream, to let out all the anger and betrayal I'd been holding in. How could she still be so connected to him? How could she keep protecting him after everything? But I couldn't think about that now. M wasn't just a shadow in the past. He was here, and he was threatening everything I cared about. "Are you serious?" I asked, my voice low with disbelief. "You're still letting him control you like this? And you're dragging me into it?" "I never wanted this," she cried. "But he's dangerous, and I don't know what else to do. I thought I could protect you, protect her. But now..." I could see it in her eyes. She was desperate. But so was I. This was no longer just about our broken relationship. It was about the future of the baby we both loved, and it felt like everything was slipping through my fingers. "M, if he touches her..." I trailed off, my throat closing up. I didn't want to think about it. I had to do something. The stakes were higher than ever, and I didn't know how much more I could take. But in that moment, all I could think was, how had everything come to this? In the days that followed, I found myself torn between rage and desperation. The situation with M was escalating, and I couldn't stand idly by while he tried to tear apart what little was left of my life. But I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do anymore. Sarah was in over her head, and honestly, I didn't trust her judgment anymore. I didn't know what to believe. But one thing was clear. I couldn't let M win. I couldn't let him destroy the future I'd started to build with the baby, the one thing that still felt real in this mess. I contacted a lawyer to make sure I had some protection, to make sure I could stay involved with the baby's life, no matter what M tried to do. The lawyer told me about my rights, how I could fight for custody or at least visitation rights. I wasn't trying to take her away from Sarah, but I wasn't going to let M control the narrative. I called Sarah the talk next day, telling her we needed to come up with a plan. We had to put everything out in the open. No more secrets, no more lies. I told her I was done with the games. If she was serious about protecting our daughter, we needed to cut M off completely. No more playing both sides. No more fear. I needed her to step up for once and fight back. It wasn't easy. Sarah was still afraid of M and what he might do. But slowly, I saw a shift. She realized that the life we were living, full of lies, secrets, and manipulation, wasn't sustainable. If we wanted any shot at fixing things, we needed to start fresh, without him in the picture. So we both agreed to go to the authorities, with what we knew about M's threats. Sarah agreed to end things with him for good, even if it meant facing the consequences of her past actions. She knew there was no going back. It wasn't a clean fix. It wasn't a perfect resolution. And, honestly, it wasn't even close. But it was a start. I may never be able to forget what Sarah did, and the truth about the baby would always hang between us. But I couldn't deny the bond I'd formed with her. I couldn't deny the love I had for this little girl. And that was worth fighting for. The fallout from everything was far from over. But in that moment, as I held the baby in my arms again, I made a promise to myself. I would be there for her, no matter what. And that was the only thing I could control. So, what would you do if you were in my shoes? Would you have stayed? Or would you have walked away like I did?